Welcome to South Orange Library Special Conversations program, everyone. I'm Laura Sims, the host of the program, and I'm so excited to have Lisa Williamson Rosenberg with us tonight to talk about her wonderful debut novel, Embers on the Wind, which we don't have copies of to sell, but you can buy it on Amazon, and she's giving us a copy for the library. So
You can also, any independent bookstore, any local bookstore, you can order it. You can order it from them, which
okay,
is,
good.
you know, yeah.
Great.
So
It's a really,
support
yeah, that's
our indies.
great.
Our indies are really important.
It's a gripping, haunting, multi-layered historical novel about several Black women through time and generations struggling with, dealing with the trauma of history and racism and sexual abuse and much more. So there's a lot to discuss, but I'll just tell you a little bit about Lisa. She is a former ballet dancer and a psychotherapist specializing in depression, complex trauma, and racial identity. Her essays have appeared in a number of journals, including Long Reads and Narratively, and her short fiction has received a Pushcart nomination. A born and raised New Yorker and a mother of 2 college students, Lisa now lives in Montclair, New Jersey, with her husband and dog.
My bio, I have to say,
The dog is not here.
My
dog,
bio used to
only the
say,
husband is here.
we're so afraid of being canceled. I changed my bio. It used to say Golden Doodle, but like that's not frowned upon because it's not a rescue.
Oh, it's not a rescue.
I
Oh dear.
heard that.
No, that dog is not appropriate.
So,
But now you've said it
yeah, I've said
on,
it, but on
YouTube,
in
basically.
front of. So that's
gosh.
okay, but it's still,
Okay.
he's cute.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, Lisa's going to start by
So-
reading an excerpt.
I will. So, you know, Embers on the Wind, I just want to say it's a novel in linked stories, and the main character that kind of ties all the stories together is a house called Whitaker House that is a Berkshire Airbnb that was formerly an Underground Railroad safe house. So this house has all this history, and the house has spirits of freedom seekers, you know, formerly enslaved African Americans who actually died on the property, and their spirits kind of interact with modern day Black women who, for one reason or other, are drawn back to the Berkshires. And I'm going to read an excerpt to start out with, and we wanted to sort of talk about, you know, very relevant right now, kind of motherhood and the meaning of being a Black mother over history, and how, you know, all the freedoms that we have as mothers today, there is still something that there's still a memory of the past, of the separation, of not being entitled to your children. And I am starting with a character named Kay, who is connected to the house in a way that's different. I'm not gonna, no spoilers, but connected to the house differently from, she's the only one who, in this story, who doesn't actually visit, but she has a much deeper connection to Whitaker House. But she is a mother, and she lives in Brooklyn, and she's sitting down in a coffee shop with her 2 children. So I will start, and I said I was gonna put on my glasses. Here they are. Okay. Brooklyn, February 2018. Kay tears her attention away from the young breastfeeding mother seated diagonally across the cafe to gaze at her own children. Though Kay weaned each of them years ago, she remembers the weight in her arms, the oneness of her body and theirs. When Miles was born, Kay left the financial consulting firm where she and Andy were both employed. Andy rose in the ranks as Kay devoted herself to motherhood. She did not begin her entrepreneurial venture, a networking platform for high-end Black hair care specialists and consumers, until Miles and Billy were both in school. Kay still arranges her hours around their needs, attributing her children's poise and self-assurance, at least in part, to her constancy. It is a luxury her middle-class parents lacked, a bittersweet luxury to be taken for granted by your kids. Miles's eyes are glued to his iPad while Billy leans into him, chin on his shoulder. Whatever game he's playing reflects red and blue swirls on both their faces as half-eaten elephantine croissants languish before them. Her children thus absorbed, Kay catches the eye of the other mother and sends her a smile. The warmest, most sisterly, "I've been there, honey," smile she can muster. The woman's face remains stone-like. The babe at her breast is a snowy shade of mixed, just how Miles was as an infant. Mom is brown as Kay, if not more so, and Kay feels her, needs the woman to know it. What wouldn't Kay have given back when Miles was new to have someone smile at her and let her know that she wasn't alone among the bright white mother mass of their little Brooklyn enclave? Oh, the slope is woke politically. Everyone who lives here is liberal. It's diverse too, Kay will admit, but on an aesthetic rather than a cultural level. Kay remembers herself in the woman's shoes, sitting alone and nursing, but not at ease, not relaxed like the white breastfeeding mothers of Brooklyn. Kay's clothes had been neatly pressed, the baby's blanket soft and fresh, Miles's onesie clean, bright-colored and adorable. His 5 strands of hair were impeccably combed, as was Kay's own perm. The white mothers pushed their bugaboo strollers, confident in dingy, unlaundered new mom clothes, their hair carelessly bound in sloppy new mom ponytails. With impunity, they could dress their infants, whether white like they were or adopted, black, brown, or Asian, in ill-fitting, spit-up-stained clothes. The only other black women Kay saw were the white women's Caribbean babysitters. The other mothers smiled uncertainly, did not befriend her on the park bench as they did one another. The babysitters also looked at her askance. Kay looked as if she should be Miles's babysitter, but there she was nursing him. The pair of them made no sense to anyone. Finally, after a music together class for infants, Kay was in the lounge area with 3 other mothers who had lingered to chat, change diapers, and nurse. Almost simultaneously, the 4 of them, Kay included, turned their babies horizontally to face them and pulled their shirts sideways as the infants latched on. All 4 shared smiles of recognition, sharing in this sweet pas de deux of early motherhood. There was relief in their camaraderie, or so Kay thought, until one of them spoke to her. "Please don't be offended." The mother, short, thin, and pale, with mousy brown hair and incongruously enormous breasts, had the kind of soft, unassuming voice that downplays the boldest of statements. "How can you breastfeed that baby? There's no way he's yours." Kay was momentarily shocked into silence. Another mother, a chunky brunette with acne-pocked cheeks, said under her breath, "Lexi." It was the fact of Lexi's friend's mortification that gave Kay the courage to find her sense of humor. Kay leaned forward slightly, squashing Miles enough to pop off her breast, face pink with exertion. "Well, of course not," Kay said, beaming unblinkingly at Lexi. "I'm the wet nurse." Lexi's mouth dropped open, but the other 2 mothers erupted in approving guffaws. Soon even Lexi applauded her bluntness, and just like that, Kay was in. She had a group of mom friends. So that's one modern, I can't see you, that's a kind of modern black, kind of upper class motherhood, right? Awkwardness. Like you're there, and this whole book kind of has moments like that where we have arrived, we're free, we're no longer enslaved, we can do everything we want to do. But you have to make sure your hair looks good if you're going to go to the grocery store or the laundromat. And if your baby is loud, if your baby is not, well dressed, there's a risk. Right. Somebody could separate you from them visually. Right. And there's a white, upper class blonde Connecticut mom in the book later whose son is adopted in black, and she's also separated from him visually. But she can kind of speak out in a different kind of way, and she doesn't have to, she can wear that messy ponytail and have full rights to him. Right. So should I read one more? Sure. I was going to read one more really short. Yeah. This is a different kind of motherhood. 16-year-old Clementine is living on a plantation in 1850. And the father of her baby is unfortunately her enslaver. She doesn't know, she's 16, she has no mother, she's sort of being looked after by little Annie, who is a field worker who's planning to run away, and Clementine has convinced Annie to allow her to join her. So, and Annie, very important about Annie is that she has, she's had 6 sons, and each of them has been sold. So this is a pain that Annie has lived with her whole life. So they have run, and they're kind of a few days out. How do you feel? Annie asks each day when they stop to rest. Her voice is always harder than the words. The answer expected, fine, is the one Clementine gives. You stay fine, says Annie. That baby's going to be born free. Clementine nods, though after all the wishing she's done, the praying for the baby to die, she wonders whether Annie's demand is too great a shift for her mind to make. Clementine never thought about running for the baby's sake. She's running for herself, away from the man who put him there, who put it inside her. Besides, caring about Josiah and losing him forever taught Clementine the risks of letting yourself dream. But born free, her own child, such a notion. On the 4th day, little Annie says, before long we'll find us a swamp town where they'll take us in for a spell. Leading the way deeper into the mossy wet, Caleb explains that there are colonies of blacks and Indians living free, hidden in dwellings around the swamp. Clementine can't imagine how folks could settle this close to plantations without being caught, but on the 5th day they come upon one such establishment in a remote spot concealed by a thick curtain of mist. The inhabitants, various shades of black and brown, speaking dialects Clementine hasn't heard before, give them food, shelter, several days' rest, and the courage to move on. They continue along their way, relying on members of other such colonies to sustain them, to guide them north beyond the reaches of the swamp. In exchange for the silver compass, a free-colored man in Norfolk helps them gain passage on the Boston-bound cargo ship where he is employed. Massachusetts is a free state, the sailor tells them, but with no papers. They'll be returned if caught. Meantime, you all stay below in the hold. None of them has been on a ship before. They keep silent, out of sight, as best they can, among the sacks and barrels, the rats and other vermin. But the lurching, pitching, and rocking echo inside Clementine's gut. Again and again, the free-colored crewman smuggles her up to the deck where she heaves the contents of her stomach, mostly bile, over the side. Each time, Clementine fears that the baby might make its she fears that the baby might make its exit along with the matter she expels, but the child clings fast inside her, hardy and stalwart, and for the first time, Clementine thinks of the baby as a person with a will, a heart, some kind of sense. You hold on now, she tells her baby. We're moving like that, see? Because we're on a boat. Just hold on and we'll be all right. And the baby answers, moving inside her. Just a kick and a shift. But it's enough to assure Clementine that she's 2 lives now, not 1.
Nice, thank you. It's really such a stark contrast to hear those 2 sections together, you know? Why was it so important for you to write about both in the same story, like both the past and the present,
Well,
especially for Black mothers?
Absolutely, because I think, you know, we are our past, you know, this country, not just Black mothers, and the conversation that's taking place so frequently, you know, do we talk about the past, do we tell the truth about the past, when everything is when it's possible for me to get a degree with you and you and you, and I can send my children to Taekwondo, or, you know, why are we still talking about enslavement?
Right.
And of course we still are, because I have to think about things that maybe you wouldn't as a mother. I have to think about, you know, the possibility of someone not believing my children, or the possibility of minimizing my needs if I take them to an emergency room. But it was important for me to show both because I think I'm fascinated by the interplay of class and race in this country. You know, I'm very aware that I grew up privileged. You know, I went to an Ivy League university, I was a ballet dancer, I live in Montclair, and yet there are privileges I don't have, and I can't take for granted. And it is it's fascinating to me, and I think it's just a great conversation, and there's so many stories in there. And I think when you sit down to write a book, you don't like decide to make a statement and you know, comment on you know, socio-political.
If you do, it might not turn
like,
out very
right,
well.
and it's kind of like, I really didn't do that. I wrote about a house, and I wrote, this whole book started with my relationship to a ghost that apparently haunted my father-in-law's house.
Yes, I wanted you to tell
And
the
so
origin
it was
story.
our relationship, okay. So, and that's kind of why I wanted to know what she would think of me, because I can read about her and have all kinds of feelings and thoughts like, wow, I've really arrived, I don't have to be beaten. I don't have to fear, you know, crossing state lines, I don't have to fear sundown laws or I can read and it's legal, you know, all these things, but then what would she think of me, you know, on roaming this house, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, can you tell us about what inspired the book, like the
Okay, sure, so
origin story?
the book started with a house that was a real house. It was my father-in-law's summer home in the Berkshires in Monterey, and it had a big story. And the story was that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. In the middle of the property was a root cellar. And in the root cellar was where the escaping African Americans, formerly enslaved, hid. And, you know, the people who were helpers, conductors on the Underground Railroad would tell them when it was time to move forward. For some reason, and I don't know why, a woman was brought into the main house. And the main house was right by the road, they didn't hide there. And she was brought into the house and she died there. So we used to go to the house kind of all the time with our kids, every time it was, you know, their holidays, summer vacations, that was the country for us. And I used to love to kind of go downstairs and look for this ghost who was repeatedly there and be like, hey, it's me, the black lady. Because what you don't know is my family, you know, my husband's family, white and Jewish. My mother would come visit too. She was also white and Jewish. And I had this idea that I was the only black woman this ghost had seen, because the Berkshires is not a big vacation spot for African American people. So I was wondering, am I, and if I am representing the present and the future with this woman, what does she think of me? You know, here I am pregnant, you know, with my feet up and yelling at him, this white guy, to go get me stuff, because he doesn't know that I can probably get it myself. And like, what does she think? Is she happy that I've got all these privileges, that I can do whatever I want, drink and eat and work or put my feet up if I feel like it? Or is she wondering, where are all the other black people? And I just didn't know, and I felt guilty, and I felt curious, and I just wondered who she was. I had this idea she's this old woman who just couldn't make it one more step and brought into the house. Then I thought, but wait a minute, what's another reason that could make a story, a real story? And I thought, what if she was pregnant? You know, a 16-year-old girl who leaves North Carolina like a little pregnant, you don't know, you know, and now she's giving birth. So Clementine, who, you know, I named her after one of my great-grandmothers, because my family generations on my father's side, the enslaved side, they all had their kids old, so that my great-grandfather was born in 1842 on a plantation yeah, my grandfather was born in my grandfather was born in 1880. So yeah, and there's a Louisiana contingent, and we don't know whether or not they were enslaved, but so I named her Clementine. I named her something else, but my editor was like, yeah, you got too many people whose names begin with A, so I was like, all right, I'm picking Clementine. But it fit for me, and I wanted to have this interplay between past and present.
Right.
And that's where I got the magical realism from, because I can see back and I can read, but I wanted her to see me.
Right.
And it wasn't me, obviously. It kind of morphed into a psychologist named Galen, who has a new baby and postpartum depression, and is sort of in this other state, this other mental state where she can't get back to herself. And here is a young girl who died in the house, and something about their energy kind of merges. And that was the first story I ever wrote. It's the story of the birthing room. And there really was a birthing room in the house, which was, a stone fireplace with tools hanging down, and it was kind of on a diagonal, and it was in this corner of the house. That wasn't really a room, but all the heat gathered there. And everything there was just little and tiny, and you can imagine, and there was a rocking chair and a cradle, and I kind of put that in there. But it wound up being the second last story in the book, because I plucked characters from each story and started earlier and earlier.
And did you draw a lot on research and on your own, like, parenting experience? Like, what all went into the book?
So a lot of my own stories, like the thing at the Music Together that actually happened.
Wow.
But I was not the witty one. It was a friend of mine was like, no, she's the wet nurse, and I never would have thought it. I was like, huh? I didn't, and it was like a different kind of, it was Montclair, and every mother looked so different from their child. Everybody was mixed, and a mother was like, how could that be yours? I'm like, really, I'm the one.
Oh.
But, and my son, to be fair, could have belonged to anybody at when he was a newborn. Like he was, we called it, he had like a Swedish face, where he just happened to have very light eyes, his skin didn't brown at all,
Yeah.
and he had no hair,
Oh
so
my gosh.
what are you gonna do? But there's a lot of research that I did in terms of the age of enslavement. I wanted to get things right. What would it look like on a plantation in North Carolina, and the Spanish moss, and I looked at so many pictures of the oak trees and the Spanish moss coming down over these rows of barracks, basically where the slaves slept.
Right.
And I remember, kind of where would the water be? Would there be a stream running through? Where would things be? And some of that I kind of threw out, but you sort of have to immerse yourself in it.
Right.
And then the 80s, I had somebody actually did talk to me who had lived in the housing project. There's one chapter is in 1983 in Boston in a real housing project that actually was there then. And then a lot of stuff I just threw in from my life. There is an incident, there are a bunch of things that I just threw in. Martha's Vineyard, the kids like playing on the beach in Martha's Vineyard, I've been there so many times in my life, and that had to go in there. For whatever reason, we don't know why, but I've been obsessed with prehistoric marine reptiles forever, and I needed a character to be, and I was like, oh my God, I had this sweet little autistic Timothy who was so intense, and I was like, okay, well that's gonna be his passion. I had a client, a therapist, I had a client a long time ago who was this adorable little boy, and he was obsessed with ships, and that was all he wanted to talk about were ships, and I was like, let's give him another obsession, and I was like, because I really love giant mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and all that, so he's going in there.
Oh my gosh. And you mentioned being a therapist. How does that influence your writing?
A lot, and vice versa. And vice versa. I'm really focused on the nuance of emotion and how we can translate our experience to another person. I know what it feels like. I know what shame feels like. But how can I, put it into words so that you understand it? Where I can describe where I feel it in my body. And I also do EMDR, where we, as a therapist, where we do a lot of, bringing up the experience. And where do you feel it in your body? And where's the shame? And is this old? Is this a new pain? Is it an old? And that, I write like that. I always have. And that's, what I read, I like to be, one of my favorite books is A Little Life, which people talk about, oh my God, trauma.
Yeah,
but it's so nuanced and fantastic and so eloquently, perfectly done. So, yeah.
Wow.
But that's kind of how the interplay between my two careers.
Yeah. And you talked to, on your website, you mentioned how dualities are so inherent to your identity. You say, as a Black Jew, a ballerina turned shrink, a recovered anorexic and bulimic responsible for feeding her family. Dual identity is part of my life and central to my writing. So how has that duality influenced your writing? And I mean, I can see it even in all of the characters that you're able to inhabit in the book. There's so many.
There are a lot of different sides. I mean, I think as a biracial Jewish woman, you are, and I can only speak for myself, you observe people so much. You know, I grew up looking at people and why are they that way, and who's like, Mom, is she Jewish or Black? Like, because you can't, you know, it was the 70s, everybody wore afros and blah, blah, like you couldn't tell. But it's like, you know, where do I fit? You know, where do I fit and what does this mean? And, you know, there were times where it was too much, you know, like when I was a teenager, you know, the thinking and the analyzing, and you know, as a ballet dancer, all you do is stare in the mirror and compare yourself to other people. Like, you know, Leslie and I were in a class where there were 100 of us in red leotard and, you know, cranberry leotards and pink tights, and you couldn't tell which one you were. You would look in the mirror, and I think there were 2 brown kids, so I had a pretty good idea which one I was. And they were both named Lisa, but it was just, you know, so who am I in relationship to you? Is kind of like the whole question, and that yeah, and I feel like
a good place for a writer to be.
It is, and I think, you know, and therapy too. But so the duality in here, I mean, this is a very black and white book, you know, blackness in relationship to whiteness and nuances and degrees of whiteness, because there's also Maxine, who is Jewish and from New York, and when, you know, in walk Catherine and Pete, who are from Connecticut and like right fresh off the tennis court, and Maxine is instantly like self-conscious about her hair dye and feeling a little schlumpy compared to these regal, elegant people who don't see themselves that way at all. So it's just the nuances of people, and then there's you know, colorism and the difference between the sisters, Kay and Michelle. Kay is light skinned, so she's the pretty sister. Michelle is dark, and therefore not only is she not considered the pretty sister, she's also not kind of deemed in need of protection when they send her to the mountains to spend time with family friends, and the father of the family is a child molester. But they don't worry who's gonna be, you know, looking at her through the people. And so it's kind of the being the pretty sister protects Kay because they look out for her more. Right. So there's that, like, what does it mean to be light? What does it mean to be dark? And you know, and I think there's also that duality in the house. Like Clementine, the 16-year-old, is a houseworker because she's light-skinned, but she's light-skinned because her mother was raped by her enslaver. And that awarded her the privilege of not having to work out in the fields, whereas Annie is I think I describe her as blue-black. Like she is slow black, she's blue-black, and her sons are, she describes them as midnight black. And the French grand-mère, who is whose daughter refuses to acknowledge that there's any black anywhere in the family, and grand-mère comes out as, aha, our ancestor was the blackest black of midnight black, and she says, and she, to prove it, she pulls out a picture of, this is a white French-Canadian lady, pulls out a picture of Sidney Poitier, and says, see, huh? And like, but, so it's a lot of, all right, what was the question? So,
you answered it.
I answered it. Like, I'll just keep talking.
And why did you choose this format of interlinked story? I mean, to me it seems like you had to tell such a complicated story in this way. But did you ever think, oh, maybe I should just have one character tell this story, you know? Like,
yeah. I started out thinking about Clementine and Galen. Well, it would have been 2, but thinking of just the story of Clementine in 1850 and Galen in 2018, the young mother with postpartum depression and her baby and how they kind of merged, and that was going to be the story. But, so one book I really love is, I love Olive Kitteridge, but I love Anything Is Possible, which is Elizabeth Strout. Also, Strout, say her name wrong all the time, but I love her. And also Homegoing, whose name I learned, I like memorized how to say her name correctly, and I can't, Yagassi, I think, but it could be wrong. I love that those books are stories, but each story kind of steals someone from the story before and borrows from each other. And that format, to me, I didn't do it on purpose, but I started looking at the story of the birthing room and what could this be? Because I kind of thought I'd finished everything I had to say about Galen and Clementine, and I was like, well then, who is this Maxine who walks in with the towels? And is she, because initially I thought I had her like stare at Galen and stare at the light-skinned baby and be like, why is the baby so light-skinned? And I shifted it. The way it is now is Maxine is like really disappointed that the baby looks white because she was so excited to see one of these gorgeous mixed race babies. And she's like, oh, but anyway, but Maxine is much more, but I wanted to know who she was and what is she doing in the house, and no, she doesn't own the house. She married a professor who came into the house as, as part of his inheritance. And then why does Maxine, who's this white artist, need to go and learn to draw black people? Because she wants to see her ghosts in real life. And she loves the ghosts who haunt the house, but she can't see them. So she goes and takes a life drawing class, and she searches all over Massachusetts for a life drawing class with a black model. And she draws Michelle, the black model, and then I'm like, okay, well then what's Michelle, this black model, doing there? Her therapist sent her to heal from her own trauma, sent her to the mountains to heal.
So was it like a...
So, and then, and
was
then there's
like a... Sorry,
it was like a
1,000-page manuscript?
No,
first?
it was not. It was little stories.
Okay.
It was little, I started out, I was like, okay, this will just be like, I'll do like 3 Berkshire stories. No, then I'll do 5 versions. And it wound up being 8. So they were contained because of the way I wrote them and my process when I wrote them. My son was in this like ridiculous behemoth of a soccer program where it was like 4 times a week, 2 hours at a pop in a place where there was nowhere to sit. So I kind of sat in my minivan in the parking lot with my laptop. And I wrote, because there was no Wi-Fi and I had no distractions, and I worked on story after story while this was happening. And I found myself volunteering to carpool these boys to this place. So but the fact that the stories were contained, I'm like, okay, I'm finished with that one. And I didn't have to, and they were less linked when I finished it. And my editor, who was amazing, both editors, my acquiring editor, but also my developmental editor that, your publisher hires a developmental editor, or, so I wrote it, I gave it to friends beta readers who gave me ideas about how to fix it. Then I gave it to my agent, and he was like, this is great, but do this, and this. I did that, and that. Then he submitted it, and the editor who acquired it was like, this is great. Can you do this, and this, and this? I was like, yeah. And then she's like, okay, and now we're ready for the developmental edit. I was like, that wasn't the developmental edit. Sorry, the first developmental edit. And I had this wonderful, Michelle Flibe was my editor. And I don't know if she was living in my brain, but she knew exactly what I wanted the book to do. And she was like, I feel like Kay would be much guiltier. And I was like, I was thinking she would be guilty. And can Pop have a bigger, there's not really much for men to do in this book. They're kind of just sitting there. Can Pop have a bigger part? Can Josiah maybe have a bigger part? And it started to, and they all said, link the stories more. The beginning of every story has to tell the reader exactly what it has to do with the story right before.
Yeah.
Which was really hard at first, because they were kind of, and also because I was thinking short stories, each character was kind of like a splash of paint against the wall.
So you were really thinking of this as like
stories.
a collection of stories.
Absolutely.
At first. Okay.
And then
with some like thematic overlap.
And the more I kind of went through all those edits And then after the second developmental edit, there's a copy edit and the proofread.
Oh, yeah.
And then like the whatever, the last thing. And so I started, people became more and more three-dimensional. And then I was like, oh, you know what, this person can come back. And Annie was somebody I really loved, but she had almost nothing to do.
Yeah.
And now she bookends the book. And I always think of,
Right.
I don't know who this is, you can see the cover.
I know, I
Most people can't
just
see.
noticed that
Most people
today.
don't notice that there's the
Yeah.
profile of a woman here.
She's in
And
there.
you can see it online better.
Yeah.
Oh, there, you
Yeah,
can
the
see it better
screen
there.
is easier to see.
Yeah, and you don't know who it is, it could be anybody, but I always think of it as Annie because she bookends the book. In the very first scene, she's brought forth in a seance in 2019, and she has the last word too in the book, so.
And are you comfortable with the supernatural element of the, I mean, you seem comfortable with it,
Mhm.
and it is genuinely like spooky in parts,
I had a review that was like, do not read this book before bed. I was like, really? It's not that scary. And yeah, it was just so funny, like that you said that, but I did not think of it as scary.
Yeah,
Because the ghosts in it, to me, were like, they were characters.
right.
It was
I
just
would
like,
say it's more, it's like,
But-
it feels haunting,
It is.
not like
But-
terrifying.
it did, it started with a ghost, the whole
Yeah,
idea was a
right.
ghost, and a ghost I wanted to meet and never did.
Right.
And I actually, I was at a book club and I read this, book club read and I came and joined them for their discussion. And one of the women is like, you know ghosts, don't you? I was like, nope, never met one. She's like, well, I do. And she told me about like all these different places she'd lived where she'd had
She'd
terrifying
encountered
encounters, and she's like, and you got it. And I was like,
But you've never
I
had
never
an
met, yeah.
encounter?
No.
Okay.
No.
You tried to.
No. I
You tried to have one.
tried. I watched the X-Files. I quit. Like, no, I never did. But I did enjoy the supernatural, and also, of course, I love Beloved. Like, there's the epigraph. What's an epigram? An epigraph. The epigraph is Toni Morrison. Is from Beloved, and I loved Beloved. I loved also Sing Unburied Sing. I like books where there is pain and a ghost that hasn't healed, but that can help people heal.
Yeah,
All of these.
right. Were there other books that influenced, do you feel like A Little Life influenced this?
I wouldn't say, I would say the one I'm working on now, maybe a little.
Okay.
The one I'm working on now, I would think, even though I started it long before I read A Little Life.
Yeah.
But I would say influences, of course, Elizabeth Strout and Yarkesi and
Toni
Colson, Toni Morrison, and of course Colson Whitehead.
Yeah.
And so I really love, I read it so long ago, but Jessie Redmond Fawcett was actually W.E.B. Du Bois's assistant. And she was an extremely prolific writer, and I had never heard of her, but I was living in Seattle in the early 90s, and I went to a used bookstore and I picked up Plum Bun, and it's just this fascinating book about a young girl who passes for white, and her mother and sister don't, and it's sort of like her trying to figure out who she is, and that was just, I wouldn't say it was so much an influence of this one, but just these are authors who've influenced
you.
me.
Right.
And, yeah. I'm thinking of house books and haunted books, like, I don't know, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
It's a haunted book.
And I have not read it, and I'm
Okay,
not gonna pretend I did.
That's one.
But I gotta add that to my TBR.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what are you working on now? Is your new, can you talk about, what do you want to talk about?
Sure, I can talk about it. I'm struggling with it right now. It is, so So I've got a few that I'm working on, including one that is like sort of a good partner to this one. And there is a sister of Galen is in,
Ooh.
Galen's sister who winds up with baby Olivia is actually a
Okay.
very, very little character, a very small character
Okay.
in that other book, but I'm not working on that one. The one I'm working on now is, it has a male protagonist, he's biracial, adopted, and it is about, he's trying to understand his own mental issues
Okay.
and suspects that they're rooted in his past. And it's got, the magical realism is actually a bigger thing in that book. It's more
Okay.
kind of unreliable narrator.
Okay.
It's narrated by a part of him, and that's all I can really say. It's complicated, but
Wow.
I think it works, we'll see. I
Yeah.
don't know if you'll ever see that book, but that's what I'm working on now.
That's great.
So, yeah.
I wanted to see if anybody, I want to pause, does anyone have questions for Lisa?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, so now I'm interested in, now that your writing isn't confined to like soccer practice.
Oh, gosh.
Kind of what I'm interested in what your practice is.
Sure.
And if you do try to like write for a certain amount of time, like Toni Morrison,
Mhm.
every day, or what you do.
So I do, so COVID changed everything. COVID just changed, there were no carpools anymore. So I see my therapy clients via Zoom.
Still? Yeah.
Still, I'm doing it, I have a number of people who have been immunocompromised. One of my children is now immunocompromised. So I'm in my house. And I have the flexibility so I can schedule my clients around my writing. So I get up and I write the first part of the day. Like I just get up and I write, and right now I'm working on a revision, so it's kind of easy to kind of plunge back into a revision. Drafting is really hard, but I find that it works best before I've done anything. I don't answer emails, I don't do spelling bee or Wordle or anything like that. I shouldn't, I sometimes do, but I just get up and I write, and at a certain point, writing time's over, and then I'll do some version of a workout, and then I'll see clients. But I find after 4 p.m., I can't really write.
I was gonna
And
say
then I
after
can't get right.
noon.
After noon,
one.
afternoon, right, afternoon I can't, but then again, I can after like 11, and I don't mean to. Like if I sit down at 11, I'll
At
be like,
night?
oh, did I do that? Like, and then it's 1, and that's not.
11 at night?
Yes,
Oh.
but I don't,
Okay.
that is not intentional, but that's what happens, like when you have to go, when you gotta leave, and you're like, oh. It's always the worst times, right? But, yeah, so that's kind of my process.
And I agree, I think drafting is awful.
Yeah.
I love
It's horrible,
being in
right?
revision. Revising
Yeah.
is so much better.
I mean, I think there are moments of drafting where you're like, wow, this
Yeah,
is
right.
great! And then you're like, oh my god, what did I do? And then you read what you wrote, and you're like,
Oh, this is all gonna go.
Yeah. Yeah, but if I think one of your questions was advice to writers.
yeah.
It's kind of like, believe anyway.
Yeah.
As much, because at any point in the process, you could just stop, and the book would not exist.
Yeah.
Because you're the only one who can make it happen, you can just stop, and that's sort of a terrifying thought, but so then just keep going, and
Right.
if it's awful,
Don't look
you'll
back.
fix it later,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
When you're drafting, don't look back.
No,
Right.
just keep going, just go, and then you'll figure it out.
Right.
And I do this thing, I don't know what you do, but when I'm just like, let me just put ideas out there and they're not actual, I write in all caps.
Oh, yes.
So I type in all caps so that it's like,
You can find it later.
and if it starts to be okay, I'll like make it in sentence case, but like, then I can find it later, but then
That's
it's
good.
less pressure.
That's
It's
right.
like this doesn't count.
That's right.
So,
I like to put things in caps that I'm too lazy to deal with at that
yes,
moment.
yep, that's
And
exactly.
then you find
right.
it later, like, oh God, now I gotta
Yeah.
do this, right?
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. It's like he can't go to the store in July because he died in May. Right. I found that, I had that happen.
Oh, no.
It's like, oh, he's dead.
Okay, you can't go to the store.
Yeah. Oh.
Any other questions for Lisa? Yes.
Hi.
Hi, from start to finish, how long did it take you to write it?
So the very, very first story says 2018, and it was 2018 when I started. And publication day, so it came out a month early, because there was like a promotional thing for a month. So sometime when soccer season. So it was like, I wanna say, let's just say, like, February 2018, and publication was July 2022. How many years?
Yeah.
So
But you
that's,
submitted it, the edits happened over several months.
the edits have, right. I got the book deal in August 2020, in April 2021. April 2021 is when I got the book deal. And then there were like the edits, and then there was, it's gonna come out here, and then it's like, oh, there's another book by a Black person that's coming out that month, let's put it on hold. I'm joking. I'm joking a little.
A little.
I'm joking a little, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. And there was also, I went on submission. So when my agent decided the book was good enough to submit, I want to say that might have been, that was probably 2020, that was probably like the summer of 2020.
Summer of 2020, okay.
I want to say, I'm not 100% sure, but it
So
was like
2 years,
a 2
I guess?
years,
Yeah.
right, 2 years of writing the book, which is really fast, I think,
Mhm.
which is really fast, and the only reason it was that fast is that I did do stories.
Right,
And when he accepted it to
right,
submit, it was stories.
right.
And I published two. I published The Story of the Birthing Room, that was the one that won, no. What I read you guys today, Coffee Shop, that I turned that into actually a short story with a happy ending, which it doesn't have, like there's no like horrible thing that happens in that story. And I think Literary Mama, and that was where I was nominated for Pushcart.
Oh, nice.
So the Coffee Shop story was published first, and The Story of the Birthing Room was the Piltdown Review, which doesn't exist anymore, but the editor was like the nicest guy. He was really sweet.
Folks
Yeah.
might be interested in hearing what the previous titles of the book were.
Oh, yeah. It was only one. You came up with some, but
Not
no.
the joke that I came up with, your original, what was your
No,
original title?
it was called Ashes in the Root Cellar.
Ashes in the
Because
root
it
cellar.
started out,
That's
because
cool.
there's a fire, and one of the things
Right.
that happened, so early on, it's not in 1850, but there's a group that's hiding in the root cellar, and they can't move on. But the next people come in, and they can't move on, because there are patio rollers in the area, and the patrollers, they call them patio rollers, and then it fills up to capacity, and a little boy who's in there knocks over a kerosene lamp, and there's a big fire, but somehow the little boy gets out, or somebody gets out, and the door is open, and there's just ashes, and that started at Ashes in the Root Cellar. And I wanted it to be about the root cellar, because the root cellar is where the escaped.
The story
You're right.
kind of
Didn't the
starts,
publisher
yes.
suggest us calling it Ashes at one point?
So at
or
one
Embers
point,
or
you know,
something?
your editor
Yeah.
gets with the team,
Yeah.
and they're like, what do people think? And you know, there are people in their like 60s on the team, there are people in their like 20s in the team who are like, interns in college, and people are like, what if it just had one word? Ashes. It's like, yeah.
Terrible.
It's like, and they wanted it there, and The Sweetness of Water had just come out and been longlisted, and it had been shortlisted for the Booker Prize,
Yeah.
and won, I don't remember what else it won, the Edward Gaines, and she's like, can you call it something evocative, like, like The Sweetness of Water, and I'm like, all right. So
So
I
you
don't,
came up with
I
Embers
think,
on the
she
Wind?
says I did, I thought
Okay.
she did, but Embers on the Wind, which I was like, there's already a book called Embers on the Wind, and it's like the Sword and Sorcery trilogy by, I forgot his name, by, it's
Is it older trilogy?
It's
Is it older?
self-published,
Okay.
and, yes, so it's older,
Okay.
it's self-published.
Okay.
But, and then somebody's got a book coming out called Embers in the Wind, Someone came out with a book called, somebody's doing a thing called The Embers Upon the Wind. There's Ashes in the Embers.
Gosh,
And that one like was
right.
more than me on Goodreads. And
I'm always fascinated by
So-
cover
Right, that
stories,
is
like stories
Michaela
about your cover.
Alkino, wait, what is her name? And I wanna say her name correctly. Michaela Alkino.
Is the
is
cover
the
artist? Oh,
Cover
designer.
artist, and she does
Designer.
she does a lot of beautiful fantasy book covers that are just like super intricate with witches and lace and lots of yeah.
Cool.
I got leaves, but I love the
Leaves
face
are
she
good.
did. Yeah.
And did you,
She's
so you liked what they showed you and they give you
So,
options?
As
or
a
how
debut
did-
novelist, and I don't know how you were when you were I was like, yeah, it's great. And pretty much everything they offered me, I'm like, woohoo, it's a book. Like, so, all these people are like, oh, I can't take
Thank
it.
goodness.
No, I was pretty easy. I had, and it was also all of 2022, remember all the books that got published, they were either like the abstract blotches of colored paint,
Oh.
and then you're like, oh, it's a face.
Yeah.
Sorta. But there are also a lot of like the woman facing away,
Yes.
and then there are a lot of like
Your
the
clothes.
black woman's
Profile?
profile,
Yeah.
like the black woman's profile. Like you can, and I was like, can I get a black
Your
woman's
glasses are
profile? Thank you so much. I was like, could you just do one of the black women profile? I guess I did. And they forgot, and it had no
Oh,
that.
really?
And
they
but I was
put
still
the-
like, woohoo, it's a book, yay, this is me. But then she's like, oh yeah, we redid it. And then she showed it to me, I was like, there's my lady with the face.
It's not, yeah, it's nice because
I
it
liked
is
it.
very
It was subtle.
subtle. Yeah.
Right, it was
You have to
subtle.
look for it, but
But I did have a moment of like, ooh, should I be like one of the ladies facing away?
Anybody else
Yeah.
have questions?
I have
Yeah.
another question. I know your books have been novels, but have you ever thought about writing an autobiography? I think a lot of people would like to know.
Memoir is definitely something I've thought of, and
Yes.
my publisher, which is Little A, they specialize in memoir and literary fiction, and yeah, I've got a lot, I used to write a blog, and there are a lot of pieces in there that I've thought, ooh, maybe I can take it and make it into something, and I enjoy creative nonfiction, so I'm not ruling that out. I feel like, some of my favorite memoirs, and right now I'm reading Finding Me, Viola Davis's memoir.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's supposed to be
I'm
great.
I say reading loosely, I'm listening to it on Audible.
That's reading. That
And,
counts.
no, but this is Viola Davis.
She reads, she's
She-
reading, yeah.
Is reading her book, and I would say, if you're gonna read her book,
Do that.
listen to her, because she's so good when she imitates her parents, and but anyway, what the thing about memoir, and I also, I am a big memoir fan.
Yeah.
But if you have a theme, like it's always best, like a unifying theme, and so if I had a theme, as opposed to, boy, I'm a lady who likes to talk, I like a lot of sentences.
I think a lot of people-
Yeah, so I would,
You could come up with a
I would
theme.
definitely,
I feel
I
like
think
you
I
could.
could.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people,
But you always, I'm
I think a
sorry.
lot of people would like to hear and know more about you. Because
Thank
you seem to
you.
have a fascinating history and experience. And I think that it'll be important to share that with others.
That means a lot, thank you very much for saying that. And I think about it, I definitely have a document on my computer, memoir thoughts. Thoughts for that other memoir, but I definitely, and so my favorite thing that I ever wrote in my entire life that got published, but it got published like, it's a very small, it's in the Common Dispatches, and it's called Statue. And my friend is a professor at Colgate, and she teaches it in one of her classes, and it's basically the story of me being in 3rd grade and going to the natural history, the American Museum of Natural History every single week and walking past the statue of Teddy Roosevelt,
Oh, yeah.
riding on a horse with a
Right.
hat
In front
and a
of the
name,
museum.
Yeah.
And then next to him is an American Indian, and then there's an African
Yeah.
slave. And they have no shirts, they have no shoes, they have no horses, they have no names. I mean, they do, actually. They are specific people, but
Yeah.
you know, you're little and you're like, oh, it's a statue of Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
And what that meant to me, and how all I thought about were the pigeons roosting on him and would one get me. And my friend, who was white, was the one who said to me, hey, that's not fair. The Indian guy and the black guy are just as good as the white guy, why don't they get horses? And I, being the one walking by I took it as a given that the Indian guy and the white guy, or the Indian guy and the black guy, why would they have horses? Like, I didn't make that, you know, I didn't actively think that, but I accepted it. Every time I walked by, it taught me something about my place. And this is 1973, so, you know, that's where I would go with, so it's in the Common, it's called Statue, it's by me if you want to check it out, but,
Sounds
I
great.
got my glasses again. But, so that would be a theme, like it would be like growing up mixed growing up biracial. I know mixed is frowned upon, but I'm 50-something years old, I can call myself whatever I want.
That's great.
And it is, you know, and very specifically having a black father who was very political and a white Jewish mother who leaned into my father's last name because it wasn't safe to be Jewish when she was growing up. You know, so it's, you know, their perspectives shaped me and who I am. So, but I appreciate you saying that, that means a lot, and hopefully.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Lisa.
Laura, thank you so
Yeah.
much, this has been such a pleasure, it's so much fun, and thank you guys all for coming.
Thank you all.
And I'm giving you a book for the library.
Great,
Yeah.
yes, we will
And
have
that's
Embers
fine.
on the Wind here at the
And I
library.
hope-
So you can
And
check it
there's,
out.
and it's that one, and then
Yeah.
I didn't write in that one.
Nice.
There's like one, I'm so embarrassed, I gave it to somebody and I'd written in it.
And I just want to tell everyone also that our next program will be next Thursday. Usually it's every 2 weeks, but next Thursday only on Zoom because the speaker is Professor Ron Watson from Beloit College in Wisconsin. That's why it's Zoom. And he is going to discuss a very controversial topic of national separation as the cure for our current state of polarization here. So I'm really excited to hear what,
What's next week?
yeah, next Thursday at 6 on Zoom. So please join us, and again, if you want to sign up for the email list, please do, so you can know what's coming up. But thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Lisa. That was wonderful.
Thank you, that was really fun, thank you so much for having me.